What saved you?
Conversations. And that sounds heaps cliche as I sit here in an Are You OK t-shirt, but that is the reason why I sit here in an Are You OK t-shirt, because that's what it's about.
That's Matt Newlands, a former police officer turned Are You OK Day ambassador and mental health advocate. During his decade in the force, Matt faced pain, distress and violence on a daily basis as he sought to protect the community. The job revealed an insight into the ugly side of humanity that only those who work in the emergency services can fully comprehend.
When I was spending a majority of my week in that environment, start to get like a warped sense of what humanity actually is. Because whilst I said before, you see the full spectrum, to be honest, like cops don't get called when things are going well.
It also led him to the worst day of his life and the unthinkable moment that will never leave him, being called to a suicide and finding it was his own mate.
To know the person that's taken their life, but to also know the people that are there as well, that are family members and friends who are also responding to a similar scene. But we're the police, and we've still got a role, we've still got a job.
The horror sent him on a downward spiral that resulted in him being convicted of a crime and almost ending his own life. But with the love of family and friends at his back and the calling to do something meaningful for others in his heart, he rose from the abyss to become the man he is today, a light in the darkness, guiding others towards a brighter future.
You can't get it wrong if you're coming at this from a place of compassion. If I truly care about you and I'm trying to just be there for you, persist with it.
If you're experiencing a personal crisis or having suicidal thoughts, please call Lifeline on 13 11 14. And for those outside of Australia, please call your local crisis hotline.
Welcome to Young Blood, a podcast all about young men's health. My name's Callum McPherson, I'm a journalist, and this is our mission to talk about the stuff that matters and isn't talked about enough. Let's do it.
This episode is proudly brought to you by Beyond Bank Australia, one of Australia's largest customer-owned banks. Beyond Bank has a strong focus on lending a hand to some of those working on the broader challenges that impact our community and is a big supporter of Young Blood's mission to improve mental health.
Matt, why did you join the police force?
That's a really big question. Straight off the bat, love it. I wanted to be a cop since I was 4 years old. And I think as a child, a lot of kids have this connection to the service bases, whether it's police, ambos, nurse, soldier, that sort of thing. But for me, as I went through high school, it was now starting to link in back with my identity. I wanted to be of service to the community. I wanted to be part of something bigger than just me, and thought I could make a real impact by being a police officer.
And how did the reality meet your expectations?
To start with, it did meet the expectations. I was put into a group of, or I guess a tribe. I was put into the identity. I was given a badge. I was given a uniform, a sense of belonging. There's a mateship and a camaraderie that occurs in the emergency services, certainly in the police, that I guess I hadn't experienced before. So it gave me that identity. I knew then that I was a police officer. Yeah.
And is that part of what drew you to it?
Yeah, that's huge. That was a huge part. Yeah, just to be part, like I said before, about something, be involved in something that's bigger than me and be able to be of service to the community. That for me was kind of make my identity.
And what did that do for you personally?
I think it gave me a sense of purpose. So I had a place. I knew that people saw that I was doing something good in the world, and it gave me this idea that I was going to be able to leave a legacy behind as well, that somehow I was going to be able to make a difference during the time that I got to walk the earth.
And do you feel like the majority of your colleagues had a similar mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. I think underlying, that's why I think you don't get into those jobs to become rich and famous, let's be honest.
No.
I think there's a calling of some description within an individual for them to step into a role like that, just to be able to endure the intensity of the environment, I guess the acceptance or not so much the acceptance from the community as well at times, be prepared to do things that others aren't prepared to do, run into danger when others are running out. Like there's something different in that's required.
And how did your career progress? Where did it start, and then how did it track from there?
Yeah, so when I joined the academy in 2006, I was, I think, one of the youngest in the group. There's about 18 of us. Did 9 months at the academy, graduated, went to Sturt for 6 months as a probationary constable, and then I was directed up to Port Augusta. So I worked up there for about 2 years, did my tenure, and then
What was that like in Port Augusta?
it was completely different. I went from having resources, I think, in a metropolitan area and being so close to the city, being sort of surrounded by other areas as well that also had numbers that if things went pear-shaped and you asked for help, you had it pretty quick. And then Port Augusta was 3 of you on duty, and the nearest person is, potentially half an hour, lights and sirens away. So if things went sort of belly up, then you were going to be waiting a while. So it was just a different frame of mind that I think you had to be in just to be ready for that.
What did you learn out of that experience and having to carry it on your own a lot of the time?
Yeah, I think it's a very steep learning curve. And for a lot of it was around effective communication, because I think to go to, say, a licensed prems in Port Augusta where things weren't going well, there's a bit of disorder out the front, but you were heavily outnumbered versus maybe going to a bar in the city where you had almost unlimited resources available to you. It's not to discount how seriously dangerous some of those situations in the city can be, but it was a different type of mindset. So all of a sudden the communication style had to change, also because I lived in the community as well. So when you're talking about population's not huge there.
Everyone knows each other. It's much more tight-knit.
Yeah.
You see a lot of the same faces.
So all of a sudden you go from maybe being in uniform and potentially locking someone up earlier in the day to then you're out of uniform, walking down the main street, maybe 3 or 4 hours later, and that person's now out on bail, and they see you, pushing your trolley around Woolworths. So it's a different environment to be in. So you've just got to be consciously aware of it. And like I said, that's where I think the communication comes into play.
Because you're trying to avoid conflict at all costs, because often you're going to be outnumbered. Those skills would have been super transferable for when you came back to the city.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even city coppers, that's ultimately your most effective tool. And I think a lot of people forget that. Sometimes I think the community almost thinks that cops are out there just carrying weapons and trying to assert themselves or force violence almost onto people to get compliance. But that's kind of the last thing that police want to be going to. And if you can resolve something through conversation, then that's best for everybody.
Well, if it comes to violence, it's going to be bad no matter what.
Yeah, that's right. And that's, I think, again, for the police, you've got to be prepared to go there, don't you? Because if cops don't, then who does?
And from there, when you came back to Adelaide?
Just came back from Port Augusta and got transferred down to Christie's Beach and spent most of my career down there. Did about 5 years, I think, from 2009 until the beginning of 2015 in January. I transferred to State TAC.
What did the job show you about humanity?
Everything. It showed what people were capable of, and I say that in a positive and a negative sense. So obviously, it showed that people were prepared to enact quite serious violence on each other, and for maybe disappointing reasons as well, like very selfish reasons. But on the other side of that, it also showed a lot of compassion for that people could show as well. So it was the full spectrum of humanity that was in that. Even in my short time, 10 years in the police is not a real long time, but yeah, I got the full spectrum.
And what did that do for your perspective outside of work?
At the time, I describe it as going sort of further into a tunnel and into a role. And I think so as I progressed into the police, a lot of those other labels that I had in the community, like being a brother or a son or a grandson, even at times being a husband and a father, a lot of those labels got dropped and left behind because police came first.
So it sort of disappeared behind the uniform.
Yeah, that's right. So there is, when I talk about identity, your identity becomes just that. So there is no more. Like for me anyway, the experience that I had was that Matt Newlands didn't really exist anymore. He had a number, had a uniform, had a badge, and, just stepped up every time he was called to.
And did that mess with your head?
Yeah.
Or were you okay with it?
Nah. For me, it was a process that I don't think I really observed at the time. It was almost, I missed it. I missed the transition. I can't tell you when it is that all of a sudden that's all I was. So it could have been the academy. I look back now and say like policing was the most important thing in my life. And that's a hard statement to say, particularly when, I've got a wife and a daughter. And even then, like when I was in the job, I look back now and said that it had to be because of, like, I guess, what I chose to do and the things that I sacrificed. So.
Was it necessary to take on that mindset, do you think? Or is it possible to keep them separate? I guess you can only speak from your own experience.
Yeah, obviously, like, all of our conversation today will only be from my experience. There's probably coppers out there that'll listen to this and go, man, he's just, he doesn't know what he's talking about. That wasn't for me. So this is always only ever mine. But what was the question again? I think
was it necessary to have that mindset of thinking of yourself as a police officer first and everything else second?
For me, it was necessary because it was how I was able to overcome I know that there was still some shifts that were occurring in me where I was maybe upset that I was missing Christmas or a birthday, frustrations that I was missing an engagement party or a wedding. It became pretty common that if we were invited to any sort of function, it was always going to be a question mark as to whether I was going to be there, and likely be that I wouldn't, because I generally worked in roles that required me to be working evenings, weekends, that sort of stuff. Because a lot of that frontline stuff that I enjoyed doing was a lot of that stuff was happening at night time.
When everyone else was having a good time and then a bad time.
Yeah, that's right. And we see it every weekend, don't we? Maybe not so much in COVID, but we certainly did for a while.
What jobs were you called to most often?
Good question.
What did you see a lot of?
Yeah, I think, I think the reason why I hesitated there is because, interesting that most of them, were probably revolving around people's mental health, their mental well-being. I think, people don't always choose to just exert violence on another person. There's something going on for that person that has resulted in that behavior or resulted in that outcome. So I think when I think about even, the assaults that you might go to, or, domestic violence, or just, I guess, even an individual in distress or crisis, a lot of it probably came back down to their own mental well-being and what they were experiencing at the time.
I think the public sort of thinks as police, running down the street, chasing the bad guys most of the day and chasing after people who snatch purses and, having lights and sirens on, doing pursuits and exciting stuff like that. When I was a reporter in Townsville, we could listen to the cops on radio all day, and I would say that it was either domestic violence or suicide about 70% of the time, which was surprising to me to learn that was the reality, that most cops, especially those starting out who were on the beat, spent a lot of their time going to those calls all day, which must really wear on young people to be confronted with that and have to deal with it, because even talking about it's so difficult often, so let alone actually having to go and deal with it.
Yeah, well, when you consider I joined the police when I was 20 years old, I got into the academy. I had my 21st birthday at the academy, and it was basically non-existent because I had exams and I was trying to be a cop, so I was this upstanding citizen that just didn't put a foot wrong. I probably had maybe
missed out.
Maybe I had like 2 beers.
Bad call.
Should have waited maybe. Maybe I should have joined later. But yeah, so then when we talk about like the identity forming through those years. My identity was being shown to me as a police officer. So when I was spending a majority of my week in that environment, start to get like a warped sense of what humanity actually is. Because whilst I said before, you see the full spectrum, to be honest, like cops don't get called when things are going well.
No.
You don't get invited over to someone's house when you just thought we'd share the celebration with you.
That's right.
They call when things have gone pear-shaped. So,
and you're spending all day and all night in that scenario.
All the time. And so you start to think, man, if this is what life is, then like this is terrible. I think to start with, there's an idea that maybe I could do something to change that, like, I don't know, maybe they've just been waiting for me to arrive and, turning point. But that's not the case, because the amount of time that we might spend as a police officer in someone's life is minimal. And it's only at time of disorder, distress, crisis. And then we try to do as best as we can to restore some level of order and then move on. And that's it. So you don't necessarily see through what it is that's going on for that person. You just basically are a consequence to someone's behavior. That's it, and then move on.
And there's no time. You're only part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And that's what obviously can be so frustrating for so many police, that they can't go further. They can't control the other parts of society that these people have to travel through, especially, the courts and education and things that all funnel into the results that you have to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. And you think even the media that follow through some of that process as well, like everybody, like you say, touches it. Everybody contributes to that experience. And it's not always a good thing.
And what have you seen from as far as coping mechanisms? What coping mechanisms did you have and the police around you for you seeing that stuff all the time?
Yeah, work more was basically the strategy. And I think so when I put a uniform on, I knew what my role was. I knew what my responsibilities were. I knew what authorities that I had. It all made sense. And for a long time, I started to rely on that. So then when I took the uniform off and got back into tried to step back into some of those other roles in life, and I didn't really know what they were or where I fit in them, because other adjustments were being made now. So, you think like if you're never there, if you're never at home for all of the important things, then relationships change, at home dynamics change. So to accommodate your absence, so similar to, I guess, probably fly in, fly out workers, you're gone for a few weeks. If I was on night shift, for example, I would be out for 7 nights in a row, and then I'd come home and I would be in bed through the day. I might have like dinner with the family, which was basically my breakfast, and then I'd be getting ready to go back to work. So that crossover, you're not there to help, prepare for the week. You're not there to do any of the chores, I guess, around the place. I wasn't spending a great deal of time with my daughter for that week, and I certainly didn't spend any quality time with my wife for an entire week. And then you have a couple of days off, and then you're into Arvos, and it's maybe the same sort of thing again, where you're just ships in the night. So,
and that really weighs on the family unit. And
obviously,
very much. If you're a family man, plays on your mind as well, where there's not really any other option, because you have to sleep and you have to work.
Yep.
But you're thinking, is this worth it? And obviously your partner or your family is going to be asking those questions too. So that's very tough. And another thing that the general public wouldn't think of.
No, and I think because those shifts occur as well, I talk about joining the police when I was 21. Like, I wasn't married and didn't have a kid when that happened. So I was able to invest all of my time and all of my identity into that role. So then as things occur outside of life, outside of work life, and roles change there, and you try to connect back in with that. And now there's these competing priorities, but policing's always come first, and there's an expectation that it always will. Now you start to find yourself in a pretty internal conflict that's pretty intense.
What about desensitization? How far along the way do you feel like you went towards being desensitized? And did you find that you became more or less compassionate, or how did you view situations differently the further you progressed in policing?
So the desensitization certainly was a big factor in, I think, my downfall as well. So I think compassion was hard. It was hard to then see any genuine victim. It was hard to really take in a situation for what it was, because you were seeing it over and over and over again and expected to see it again.
Yeah. So it's hard not to get bitter because you imagine that, well, this isn't going to stop. This same person is going to do this again and get the same result. And it's very difficult to not just get frustrated by that.
Yeah, because that was my perception of their environment. This will always be like this, So now you're just getting in my way, and this is frustrating because I would like to be going to do other things and, maybe more important things. So compassion was a hard one, and then you start to disconnect with why it was that you joined in the first place.
And so did you start to change in ways that you didn't like?
Absolutely. So I think my behavior became I was less compassionate for myself then as well, and just stopped caring. I think by the time I got out of the police, I was already in a place where I thought it didn't really matter if tomorrow it didn't come, and some days that was almost a preferred option.
Tell us about that horrible day in 2013.
Yeah, so it was a very significant day. A friend of mine and colleague had been struggling with a fair bit of stuff at home, and had shared little bits with some of the people at work. I was working an evening shift and got a phone call from one of the guys back at the office that said that there was a job that I needed to be aware of. And unfortunately for that particular evening, my friend had taken his own life, and it had a huge ripple effect through not only his close community, certainly through the work community, and there was an expectation, I think, of us still we still have to do our job, and we still have to work. We still have to be police. The community's still expecting us, but
even in that circumstance, though, that's would be something that so many people dread, and that is so extreme to actually turn up to a suicide call and have it be someone that you know.
Yeah, that's right. And to not just, I guess, know the person that's taken their life, but to also know the people that are there as well. That are family members and friends who are also responding to a similar scene. Like it. But we're the police, and we've still got a role, we've still got a job, and when we talk about job first, in those environments, there's someone still has to do things, And
were you able to do that?
Yeah, so I think on the night, I think there's even other times throughout my career where I was able to, like, my wife got to a point where she said that she could tell when I was working, so because I would just disengage. So she'd pick up the phone. Or she'd call me and just go like, "Oh, I'll call you later because I'm not speaking to Matt." And I think there's a way of doing that, just shutting off and just getting the job done. So, which is then just part of that suppression of all of the things that you're taking in at the time, all of the emotions that come with that, not actually seeing it for what it is.
Yeah, so shutting it all down.
Yeah, and shutting it all out because it's necessary. Because to connect in with what was actually going on was going to be too distressing and would get in the way of the process that was still required.
So did you feel like you were wearing a mask when you had the uniform on, or that you turned into that?
Yeah, every time. And I think there was a safety in it to start with. And then there was like a shift where it started to become a disconnect that I didn't like having to be that anymore. Talk about being a consequence for people's behavior. I was like, I think even in one conversation when I was at my worst, I was describing myself as the darkness because no one ever liked seeing us. And the roles that I did meant that I was only ever chasing those that didn't want to be caught, that had committed crimes against people that were more serious in nature as well. So there was this constant idea that humans are just quite destructive creatures.
And with that night, how did you immediately change in yourself after that?
On reflection now, I think that there was a turning point there around none of this really matters, because if this is how it ends, then for him, it happens regularly in the emergency services. It's no secret that the suicide rate is quite high. But it became this, well, what does it really matter? If this is who I am and this is what I do, then none of my actions matter anymore. So I'll just do whatever I feel like and just didn't really value myself anymore. Yeah.
So nihilism.
Yeah.
That's rough. What happened from there? What was the next few years like? And was it a slow burning sort of descent, or was it more or less immediate?
No, I think it was a slow burning process. I guess it probably depends on your perspective of time frame as well. So end of 2013, that particular incident occurred, and you can't also discount the years previous as well of the accumulation of trauma that contributes to one's mental health as well. But
do you reckon you'd registered any of that to that point, or had it just been subconscious building up?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think even the association had brought over some expert who spoke to a group of people, me being one of them. I went along to one of these evenings where he spoke about hypervigilance and the impact of policing on your life, and I was like, man, that must really suck for others that experience that. And I think now I was probably in the middle of that myself, just
because you were so consumed by this idea of you, the police officer, that you didn't realize it
wasn't me. I had all my stuff together, so I was in control of all of that. So it was a slow burn. We went back to work, I started to, there's a lot of that comparative suffering to say, well, I wasn't as good of friends with this guy as maybe others were, and I didn't work on his team. So it's more fair for the team to be able to take time off. And I still think that, there's a lot of people out there that are hurting a lot more than I was. So we went back to work, we put the uniform back on, and we just kept doing it. And I just kept on suppressing that, going, okay, well, this is what it is now. So, it's kind of this further acceptance of going darker or deeper down into that dark tunnel of, well, I chose this, I signed up for this, I can't complain about it. I read the brochures and followed the progression of the career, and I was good at it. I was getting qualified in different areas, and I was having leadership opportunities as well, and I saw myself as being a career copper. I knew that I would be destined for great things, and I believe SAPOL would be my platform. It took a while.
What happened to your policing in those next few years when you had that mindset?
I think I started to push a lot more boundaries, and that was more so around my own safety. So, rather than waiting for backup, I'd just go into a busy hotel, for example, that I knew that there was problems with, and rather than waiting for more people, there might have only been 2 or 3 of us, we'd just go do the work anyway, because I thought, well, the worst thing that happens is I'll get hurt, and so what? I think it just started to just switch off, I think, on a lot of those things. I went to a lot more of the intense jobs, might drive a little bit quicker, or push a little bit harder than maybe I should have, just because I didn't care what would happen to me if
did it feel like self-punishment?
Yeah, there was a lot that I carried, particularly after my friend, because I truly believe that the police restore order. So I was the police. I was there. I was in charge for a short period of time that night. It was my role to restore order to that, and I couldn't. You can't bring people back to life. So it was like, all right, well, this was somehow my fault. That I should have done more. I should have been better. Insert every other judgment could come up with, and so it didn't matter. I'll be punished for this then.
So you were carrying that guilt.
Yeah.
And then the output of that was you being more aggressive and more foolhardy with looking for danger.
Yeah.
Almost like you were inviting something bad to happen to you.
Yeah. Everywhere. I thought that someone's got to go deal with some of these jobs that are coming up, and I'll happily let it be me, because if a copper gets hurt and that's me, then I probably deserve it anyway. But to hear, if another copper got hurt and I didn't go to that job, that didn't sit well with me. So
it sounds like you always cared about others more than yourself, and then that increased, but not in a positive way for a long time.
No, well, I think that's the cult. Like, that is a culture, is that in the police, others are always more important. I said you don't join the police or the fire department or whatever emergency services for yourself. You do it for others. Even some of the work I do now, people are still, like, the service personnel are still saying the same. They're still trying to be of service to other people. And it's not always, often it's not healthy.
What did it do to your relationships when you became this sort of robot guy?
Yeah. And that's the best way to describe it.
RoboCop.
That's all it was. It's emotionless. It was just completely shut down to anything. And I think then, which is probably another reason why going into more intense situations, is because there is a feeling of something, and that more often than not is fear. But it was still an emotion.
It wasn't that numbness that you felt most of the time.
So it kind of, it's an extreme, like, risk-taking behavior, which wasn't just at home. Like, it was outside. I was drinking more. I certainly didn't care about any of the relations. I didn't have any friends, like, they weren't in the police. And even then, like, I have some really close friends in the police, but we're only ever policing. So it was hard then, because we kind of had obligations to fulfill family commitments and stuff outside. But even when I was with family, I just wanted to go back. I wanted to be back in the job because it made more sense.
Because you didn't know who you were outside of it.
Because SAPOL was my identity.
Do any of those situations stick out particularly where you really did take risks?
Yeah. One which resulted in, like, me separating from SAPOL in quite dramatic fashion. That was 2015. So things at home were already in a bad way. You know, I'd betrayed my family. I had moved out for a period of time. I was suicidal myself. I was really struggling with who it was that I was. Believed myself to be a bad person, and then tomorrow might not ever come. And I thought that I still had that under control whilst I was at work. I took a week off at one point, and that didn't really do anything. I felt like it mid me worse because I couldn't go back.
Because you're just left with yourself, and you didn't want to be yourself.
Yeah, that's right. I think I was just too scared to see who it was that I was, and so I wanted to get back into the job because it felt a bit safer. So I went back to work. There was a night in July. We had a job. It was a bit of a nothing job, to be honest. I was working with a couple of other guys. I was a state tactical response group at this stage as well. We came into possession of a baseball bat in lawful means. We didn't end up charging the person with anything. It was, like I said, it was a nothing job. But rather than book that bit of property in to our property and follow all of those procedures, took it back to the office, and it just floated around there for a bit with this idea that we'll give it back next time we see this person. She was known. But that aside, there was a lot of banter, a lot of just rubbish talk in the office about keeping it, and I took it seriously and went down that path. And one of the guys on the team, he did what he thought was the best thing to do, and I guess there's always going to be mixed opinions on what's the best thing to do in that scenario. But he went to anti-corruption branch, and about a week later I was arrested. So and all of a sudden my identity was completely stripped. Yeah.
What happened then?
So on the day, they put me in a cell at the watch house, which was obviously a big thing because for 10 years or 9.5 years, whatever it was at the time, I had put people on the other side of that door, and now it was my turn. And I believed that, I believed it was my turn. I'd done the wrong thing, and I was seeking a punishment, and I found one. They charged me with aggravated theft. I was bailed to appear in court at a later date, but they suspended me as well, as you'd expect. And I remember the suspension papers being served was the worst part of the whole experience, because all of a sudden it meant that I wasn't me anymore. I was nothing, and I couldn't talk to any of the people that I knew. I wasn't able to talk to any of my colleagues. Well, now, ex-colleagues. We talk about isolation being, in the Are You OK message as well. Like Are You OK talks about isolation, the feeling of burden on another, and also having the means to take a life are sort of the three, sort of ingredients that are necessary. And I had already felt like I was a burden on others because I was making a mess of everything I touched and everything I got involved in. I certainly had the means to be able to take my life, and I think through that last final act of now you can't talk to your community, and I had no one else outside of the job, that was it. Like now I was completely isolated.
And your identity had disintegrated, and it must have felt at that point like it was going to be too much of a task to build a new one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought there's no coming back from this. That's all I was a cop. And then I started to think about the impact that it would have on my family, the impact that it would have on my grandparents. My grandfather was still alive at the time, and he'd served in the Air Force. My brother was in the military. You just start to think of all of those flow-on effects of it's not just an individual that signs up to the police or that type of career.
The
family sign up as well. And, a lot of people talk about what supports are in place for the individual, but, that is important, but they don't really ever ask the question, what supports are in place for the family, because there's none, there's nothing there. So for my family then, to my wife in particular, to have to then carry that, knowing that I was already broken, and I was in a really bad way, but now like this had happened as well. And not only the impact that it had on me, but what does that mean for her? What does it mean for us? You know, we were in a pretty bad way, our relationship. She was still fighting, thankfully. We're still married now and have a really great marriage, but only because of her and how hard she fought to bring me back. So yeah, it was a really, really difficult time to just think that there was anything possible other than ending it all.
What saved you?
Conversations. And that sounds heaps cliche as I sit here in an Are You OK t-shirt, but that is the reason why I sit here in an Are You OK t-shirt, because you know that's what it's about. It was a conversation that I had with the boss after I was bailed from the watch house. My boss, he was down at the watch house as well, and he said, I'll give you a lift home. And we had a conversation on the way home, and it was not about the job, and it wasn't about what had happened or anything like that. He was asking me questions about life outside of the police. I remember him asking about my dad and my mum and, you know, my wife and my daughter, and just
trying to find a reason.
Yeah, exactly right. And I'm not sure if it was intentional on his behalf or not, but that's exactly what was happening, is that all of a sudden it just didn't feel so heavy anymore. And when I got back home, he didn't take anything away from the situation. He didn't fix anything. It was still there, but it was connecting in with maybe who else I was.
So you told him all of it? Or?
Yeah, I answered the questions, and I think because I was in this, like, this is probably it. You know, when I knew that when I was in the watch house, that was my last day. And because I'd had thoughts like that before, and thought, well, it's certainly not coming back from this one, so this will be it. And I think I just started to open up to him about, you know, there were pretty general questions about my family structure, and and then all of a sudden we got back home, and I think he was a bit worried about what the afternoon might look like for me. And I remember saying to him, I know what you're thinking, and like, nah, not today. So I went inside and had to try to make a few phone calls to people and start just piecing together the next couple of hours.
So what was the effect of that one conversation? Like, what did that change in your mind from leaving the watch house to getting home?
Mm-hmm. Hope, I think. It was a disconnect from the darkness. It showed me that it reminded me that there were other things that were in my life right then. And I'm not even so sure that at the time I really recognized it for being that, other than thankfully my brain did. Because it's when I think back to that time now as to what it did for me. And so then it was really around, like, let's just get through let's just see how this plays out. Yeah, that doesn't mean like, let's just see how the next 60 years plays out, because I wasn't in a good, healthy space. And that sounds quite overwhelming when you start to, you know, when you're in a state of like that. But it was more about, let's just see what happens like this afternoon, you know, see what happens when my wife finds out. She was at work when all of this stuff had happened, and my daughter was at kindy. You know, let's just see how this plays out.
And then did you communicate with your wife after that?
Yeah. We had started to have a few more, you know, involved conversations about stuff that was happening at home. Certainly started to open up a lot more about stuff that was going on at work, and just generally what was then going on for me, and how I was struggling. And it wasn't an overnight thing. It's not like the next morning I woke up feeling refreshed and ready to tackle the world, because I still had a whole heap of stuff that I had to get through. Court, SAPOL stuff, you know, all of that. Still struggled with the suicidal thoughts, still struggled with paranoia. You know, that went on for months.
Did you start to get emotional with your wife talking about these things? Did you feel emotions for the first time in a long time? Yeah.
I think that was it. It was starting to connect back in. Go, well, let's actually talk about some of this stuff and acknowledge what's going on. Like, you know, and the turning point was beginning of 2016, where I ended up writing a letter, which I still have it. I've still got the journal from then, and it's some pretty tough reading when I check back in on it. But I keep it because it reminds me of how far I've come. And I started to write what almost looked like a suicide note to start with, but it wasn't that, you know. And I even named that in the letter when I read it to my dad, and I read it to my mum, and just said, you know, this stuff about me, these allegations and stuff, there's some truth to this stuff, and I want to do something about it. In 2016, I was like, I'm not going to be a victim to this anymore. You know, for me, an individual gets to define themselves in the moment, and they get to define themselves like in that day or the next day. And we've all got stuff that we've done that we probably, you know, maybe regret or wish we'd done different.
But it doesn't have to define you forever.
No, exactly right. And so for me, it was like, well, if I'm not going to take my life, if I'm going to choose to live life, then I'm going to choose to live life. So, well, what life do I want to live then if I'm going to hang around? And for me, that was about just talking, you know, to everybody, because I knew how important it was to me. It was quite selfish to start with, but I think other people were getting something from the conversations as well. And it wasn't all, you know, oh, my life sucks because I've just ruined my career and I'm struggling with my marriage. It was really about like, you know, who are you? And, you know, how did you find that out? And it was trying to be a bit more optimistic, not positive, because it's a bit of a rubbish situation, but I was trying to be optimistic, like things can get better. You know, if I just start making little bits each day, digesting bits of information that is different to maybe what I was digesting before. So rather than constantly seeing people, you know, being mean to each other and just causing like crazy violence to each other, what if I go looking for stuff that's a bit more optimistic and hopeful, and started to just reprogram my brain? So that was January 2016 was the turning point. I stumbled across some YouTube videos by Dr. Eric Thomas, the ET, you know, hip hop preacher. And some of the stuff, it just got through because he delivers with such intensity, which is what my brain needed because it was so shut off. He just got through. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I can do this. And it was like hours that I would spend. And when I'd find myself in a really shit space, my wife would say, I think you just need a bit of ET. And I'd sit on YouTube and just, you know, watch videos and just going like, you know, what is this? But man, it was effective. And yeah, and so I just kept talking. I just kept talking because I knew that I started to engage a psychologist. I had been seeing one throughout 2015 anyway, and not really engaging with that process. But yeah, I was just talking to everybody. My mates in particular, they knew what was going on. I had two mates in particular, which I still say today, they kept me alive. You know, every day they'd call me and just, it wouldn't be like, oh, Matt, you know, how's life? It was just, you know, what do you got on for today? And, you know, can we come around? Can we see you? And they'd just stop in, or they'd send me text messages, you know, just thinking of you, man, like, love you, bro, like that sort of stuff. And it was always just so well timed. And I thought that's powerful. The power of words of another to just keep another, it was like oxygen. It was just keeping me alive. And, you know, I borrowed their belief in me because I didn't believe in myself at the time.
And the more you talked, what happened inside you?
The more I talked, I started to find myself. I started to learn things about emotion. I actually started to find things that brought me some level of joy and value. So I started to just observe things. So I would, you know, I went and tried like yoga and a sweat lodge and all these things that previously I'd be like, there's no way I'd ever do any of that stuff. But I was like, let's just try it.
Just a full 180.
Yeah.
Pretty much doing the opposite of what you would do before.
Thought because whatever I was doing before wasn't working. So let's just flip it, you know, and just give that a crack. And just, okay, well, some things didn't work and some things did. Yeah.
And how did you get involved with working in mental health?
So after the police, so 2016, halfway through the year, SAPOL, they sacked me as a result of taking the bat, and the courts decided to convict me as well, which as I pled guilty in January. I indicated to my legal team that I wanted to plead guilty because I had in fact taken it. So all of a sudden I found myself a convicted ex-cop, you know, which is
who would have thought?
Yeah, I know, which has got like a really intense label, doesn't it? You know, people, they go like, oh, you know, wow, that's...
Yeah, you found that intensity you wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
Previously.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I get people's attention with that. That's for sure.
You're a bad guy.
They think that. Yeah. And people are excited by this story. And then when they find out what it is, they're like, man, that's actually pretty disappointing. But
yeah, like, you're a big softie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, that I got into a bit of business development in basically whatever job I could find, because like I said, 2016 was still really difficult. We talk about transition out. I didn't know who I was still finding out who I was. I didn't know how to transfer 10 years of policing back into the private world and how people would find that valuable, if they would find it valuable. Did a few different bits and pieces, I guess just testing things, and just took whatever opportunity came up, because you can't be too picky when you're a convicted ex-cop that's been in the Advertiser. So you go with whatever you can get to pay the mortgage. And then I was like, no, you know what? These things aren't working for me. I'm still at my core here to be of service. I'm still destined for great things. And yes, APOL isn't my platform, but I'll make my own then. I'll build my own. So I started just to look around at what I needed to get into community services, mental health service. I didn't really know much about it. Turns out by doing 10 years in the police, they give you a lot of certificates for that stuff, which then makes sense to people in the private sector, as to go, well, when you've got certificates in leadership and management and business administration and community services, and
transferable,
a lot of transferable stuff. And I think a lot of coppers don't realise that. So I got snapped up by one of the NGOs here in Adelaide, and I've just been taken under their wing and been shown and introduced to a lot of people, and really enjoyed the ride. Now I get to be of service.
And why have you become an Are You OK Day ambassador?
So that decision for me was, I think we've touched on already, is I knew the power of a conversation. I didn't even know community ambassadors were a thing until my cousin in Sydney is also a community ambassador. I was only just messaging her just before, because this obviously gets a bit busy this time of year for both of us.
Yeah.
She had said about this thing that she was a community ambassador, and so I reached out to Are You OK, and I was like, what does this mean? And basically it's just sharing the message and the power of conversation, and it's an education space. We're not talking to people that are necessarily the people that are struggling, but we're trying to look at instilling some confidence and encouraging people to ask just some of those, what can be quite a difficult conversation. I know it gets thrown around a fair bit, but for some people there's a bit of fear. What if someone says no? So for me, I wanted to get behind that because I thought it was a real opportunity to help educate others and give them that confidence to go ask if they recognize that something's different in a friend. And people said that to me. Yeah, we saw you weren't really quite the same, but didn't really know what to say or how to ask. And I think that, by me doing this, hopefully there's a few people out there that feel confident to do it themselves.
So what if someone says they're not okay?
Yeah. Good question. I think the biggest thing about that is being prepared for that, for them to say, I'm not traveling so well. Because I think in that preparation, there is this understanding of, okay, well, if I know this person, if I'm going to go and have a chat with Callum and ask him how he's going, what if he says that he's not okay? What am I going to do next? And what is it that I can offer? And then what is it that I could maybe refer him to? So depending on how that conversation goes. So if that was to happen, it really is about, well, is this conversation, do you want to sit and have a chat about it? Because for a lot of people, you don't have to be a counsellor, a psychologist, or anything like that. You don't have to be a professional in this space.
Yeah, you can't be.
No, just willing to listen. That's it. Just willing to listen. Because like that drive home from the watch house, for me, that boss didn't do anything other than just listen to me. He asked questions and he was engaged. So if they say they're not traveling so well, okay, let's just engage this conversation then. What's going on for you? How can I be involved in this? What is it? Do you know what it is that you need? Because that can also be a difficult thing as well. So it's listening to that person with the intent to actually listen, not to respond, not to fix, not to take responsibility, but listen just to be able to hold space.
And from your own experience, what effect does that have emotionally on that person?
I think to actually feel like you're heard is quite a powerful feeling. To be able to share something with another human being. Humans aren't designed for isolation. We're a pack animal. There's a torture in that is by putting people in solitary confinement. So I think to be able to share something and to be heard by another is really that feeling of acceptance. And I think once things are shared, that whole a problem shared is a problem halved, as cliche as it sounds, is actually true. Like for me, it was no one stepped in and could take away my actions. I had to take full accountability and full responsibility for my actions. I still do. I'm still a convicted ex-cop. And
that's what we're calling this episode.
Yeah. Feel free. You might get, if more people might be drawn to it. They're like, I want to hear that story. But yeah, it is an acceptance.
If you're heard, you matter.
That's it. Yeah, you could call that the name of your podcast. But that's it. That is it. There is value then. It's a perceived value, and it's a felt value. Someone is actually giving me their time and hearing what I'm saying and acknowledging that, yeah, that sounds like it's pretty full on for you. And there's no judgment in that experience.
Or trying to compare it to your own experience, because another common one is playing whatever it is down because, I've been through something worse.
Yeah.
But there's a way to do that as well, where relating to someone is a good thing, but with them being the one who needs the attention.
Absolutely. Because if you'd said, I'm struggling a bit because I just lost my job.
And you say, that's nothing.
Exactly. I lost 2 jobs. You're like,
that's not helpful. But if you say, I've been through that myself and I felt this way and I'm listening to you.
That's right.
Then that's different.
Then that's there's a level of connection there. And I think when you can do that for another person and really listen, it starts to create space then for, encouraging action, because there's a trust that's starting to build as well. So if I'm actually feeling as though I'm being heard by you as we're talking about what's going on for me, and then we land at this space where I go like, I'm not actually too sure what to do with this. You might have an idea, you might have a suggestion for me, and it might be putting in 2 or 3 things on the table for us to look at and see what I might connect with. But now I'm going to do that.
That person has to know that you really care first, because there's a lot of trust in opening up to, the most sort of sacred parts of ourselves that we don't share with the rest of the world.
That's it. I think there's a motivation of the other that's, I know that they're just trying to get the best for me now, so I'm listening.
So what actions can we take for Are You OK Day and then in the rest of the year as well?
Yeah, and I'm glad you said like the rest of the year, because I think sometimes there's this Are You OK Day and it's just one day. It's not. It's every day, Are You OK Day. The actions are really going to be led by the individual, but I would strongly encourage people to, don't underestimate the power of just being able to have a conversation in the morning around maybe the coffee shop in the workplace, or the coffee machine in the workplace, or maybe the coffee shop before you walk into work, or maybe it's you might offer up to go for a walk to work, you might park in the same spot, whatever those little points of connection are, is not underestimating the power of those, because I guess even in a work environment, maybe you might be the only person that person actually gets to have a conversation with. They might hang on that coffee in the morning with Callum because that's the only time they get to really just check in about their weekend. So actions can be quite perceived to be quite small, but hugely significant. They might also be, have you spoken to your wife, your husband, your partner? Have you spoken to your mum or dad, or have you got any other friends you can share this stuff with? Have you spoken to your GP about it? Do you have a counsellor? Is that something that you'd want to do? Because, again, I'm happy to jump on Google and see if we can find something. Like, it doesn't have to be this really intense process either, this taboo topic. But for a lot of people, I think, just those everyday conversations. Yeah.
And don't assume that those who seem like they've got it all together necessarily do. Ask them as well.
Absolutely. I think the environment we live in today's age with social media and that sort of stuff, it's some people are like, I can't believe that happened to this particular person. They looked so happy, or you don't ever know. You're looking for those small adjustments. Me and you have never met before today, so it's going to be really difficult for me to pick any differences in your presentation or your behaviour, but I'm sure that you've got a couple of close mates or, family members that might go, hang on a second, Callum doesn't usually talk like that.
Trust that gut feeling.
Trust it, because, if you can't get it wrong, if you're coming at this from a place of compassion. If I truly care about you and I'm trying to just be there for you, persist with it. Yeah.
What do you see when you reflect on everything that you've been through and the man that you are today?
I see a lot of lessons learned. I see a journey, and My wife said to me probably a few weeks ago now, do you think you do the stuff you do now because of what happened to you in the police? Or, basically to flip it around. So why is it that you do what you do? Is it a consequence or was it necessary? So did all the stuff in the police happen so that you could do this? And I think I'm now starting to realize that it doesn't really matter. We're here now. So I've learned some stuff. I've experienced some pretty intense moments. I think about the fact that there was 2 particular days in my life where I chose to not see tomorrow, but I'm here. And that gives me more hope that, if things could be like that bad and now I'm here, like imagine what can happen in the next 5 years. Because, I'm ready for the next 5 years. And 5 years ago, I wasn't ready for the next,
Well, we're all glad you're here now.
Thanks, man.
And
Thanks.
For a convicted ex-cop, you're a pretty good guy.
Cheers. Thanks, man.
If you're a fan of the work we're doing or have a suggestion for the show, please rate us on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment. You can follow Youngblood Men's Health Matters on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube, and visit our website youngbloodmedia.com.au to stay up to date. And most importantly, if this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone you love and start a conversation of your own. This is Youngblood. Thanks for being part of the mission. Catch you next time.